next group is going to be birds. So if we look at birds, they're part of kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, and now class Aves. Aves is where we get our prefix for aviation and aviators, which refers to flight or the ability to fly. But scientists believe that birds have characteristics similar to reptiles, which means that they would have had a common ancestor back in the day. And so those characteristics that are similar to reptiles is they too will form an amniotic egg, similar to those of our reptiles, allowing for their embryo to develop in an aquatic environment. And they too also have scales. And those scales are going to be located on their legs and their feet. And those are going to contain scutes and scales similar to that of our reptiles that we've seen in the last presentation. The key characteristics of birds, the first is that they have wings. Their forelimbs or their front limbs are actually going to be modified into wings. While all birds have wings, not all birds can fly. You have, for instance, the ostrich down there or the penguin. Those birds cannot fly because their wings or their body is too big and their wings cannot provide enough lift. Second characteristic is that their body is covered with feathers. The feathers are going to actually believed to be modified reptilian scales that have developed from what are called pits, and thus they've formed what are known as follicles, and those follicles then develop into the feathers themselves. Birds are able to replace these feathers throughout their lifetime, which is similar to our reptiles and how they molt and are able to replace those scales. When we talk about the feathers, there's actually two different types of feathers that I want you guys to know. The first one is contour feathers. Contour feathers are going to be covering the body, or the feathers that you'll find that cover the body of an adult bird. This gives the adults their shape and their size. It also, what you'll find is on the wings, those feathers are going to be longer and bigger. Those will develop into what we call flight feathers. It's a type of contour feather. They're specialized, once again, found on the wings and the tail, and then they provide lift, or they're able to provide lift for the bird, thus giving it the ability to fly. With the contour feathers, what you'll find is on adult birds, they have what are known as pring glands, or little tiny glands that are going to be located at the anterior end of the bird, and it produces oil. This oil is going to be used for both cleaning the feathers and for also waterproofing the feathers. So what you'll see is a bird will actually go through a process known as preening, which is running their beak to that pring gland, squeezing out some of that oil, and then moving that oil across their feathers, where they'll clean and waterproof those feathers, rearranging them, allowing them for more insulation or better insulation and better flight as well. So you can see both our penguin is doing the preening process. That little pink spot is going to be the pring gland located just above the tail. And then this duck down here is actually running his beak through his feathers as well, rearranging them. And that process is known as preening. The other type of feather that we have is going to be down feathers. Down feathers are going to provide insulation. And specifically when you have a baby bird, their body's going to be covered in down feathers. And thus, as the bird ages or develops, it's actually going to start to develop our contour feathers. These feathers will shed before they are full grown, and that's where we actually get our down or downing for like our pillows or your blankets. Is from these chicks, as they develop, they drop those down feathers. If we look at the anatomy of a feather, its structure, how it's made up, there's actually some cool parts to the feather. The first one is going to be the shaft, also called the rachis. And this shaft is going to run the whole, or be the main vein that runs the whole length of the feather. And so you can see in this picture here, it's going to be that middle line running the whole from the tip to the bottom down here. That's going to be the rachis. It provides the structure or the support for the rest of the feather. The vein is going to run on either side of that. So on either side of our rachis or our shaft in the middle, we have a vein. So one vein here, one vein down here. This gives the feather its shape. Within the vein, we have two different things that are known as a barb and a barbule. A barb is going to be the main branches that come off of the shaft or the rachis that make up the vein, and then each one of those will have its own little branch off of that has a little microscopic hook, and those are known as barbules. You'll see that here. So if we were to look at this, here's our rachis or our shaft, and then running from that, the main branches, those three coming off of there are known as barbs, and then the little tiny branches that come off of there that have these little microscopic hooks are going to be known as barbules. So what you'll find is that when a bird goes through preening itself or rearranging those feathers, what they're actually doing is they're running their beak so that they can rehook these barbules together so that they give their feathers back their shape. You'll see some feathers throughout their lifetime will become damaged. Others will start to unhook from each other, and when they run that beak through doing the preening process, they can rehook those barbs and those barbules, giving that feather back its shape. Third characteristic of birds is going to be their strong, lightweight skeleton. What's unique about bird skeletons is their bones are actually hollow. So if you've ever had a pet bird or you've held a bird, they're very light, which once again allows for their body to be better adapted to flight. Don't have to provide as much lift because their body's not as heavy, and thus it allows for them to once again be better adapted for that ability of flight. What's also cool about their skeleton is they will have several bones that are fused together, thus giving them a very strong, rigid skeleton. This allows for muscles then to develop onto those strong, rigid bones and allows for them to develop muscles that are, once again, used for the ability of flight. So what you'll see is, like, for instance, the breastbone is very large, and in front you can see that red arrow is pointing to the breastbone down here. That's where our bird will develop its breast in order to, once again, those are the main muscles used for flight and for flapping the wings, and so therefore that breastbone provides that anchor of support for those muscles. Same with the collarbone. So you can, once again, you can see here the breastbone and then the clavicle, which would be the collarbones as well. They're fused together in order to provide that anchor of support for those muscles that are going to be used for flight. The fourth characteristic is going to be endothermic metabolism. Their bodies, birds' bodies, are able to maintain higher temperatures, usually about 40 to 42 degrees Celsius. These higher temperatures are going to be due to the fact that they have higher rates of metabolism, even higher than that of humans. Think of all those birds and the many miles they have to migrate and fly. They have to have a high metabolism rate for that in order to provide enough energy for that process. That's why you'll see birds usually eating high caloric food like nuts and seeds, and those usually have enough energy in them in large amounts in order to provide this high energy that is needed for the ability to fly. Fifth characteristic is their super efficient respiratory system. With the ability to fly, once again, it's high energy is needed, and that means high oxygen as well. And so these muscles need a high amount of oxygen in order to do that process. Thus, birds have to have super efficient lungs. They have a very high surface area to volume ratio, even higher than that of our reptiles, and they also contain several air sacs that hold air throughout their body. You can see here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different air sacs that attach to the lungs and provide more oxygen or more air in order to give the bird and its body the oxygen it needs in order for flight. Within those lungs, they will also have a ability to do counter current flow, which once again, similar to our fish and our spiders, remember their book lungs and the gills had counter current flow as well. This exposes that air to the bloodstream for a longer period of time, thus increasing the oxygen absorption rate within the body. You can see those birds, once again, those air sacs that are found within their body. A lot of their interior or their organs are going to be those air sacs that can fill up with oxygen and help maintain that oxygen level needed for flight. The sixth characteristic is that they have a completely divided ventricle. Our reptiles had a partially divided ventricle. Now our birds will have a completely divided ventricle. This septum that our reptiles had that was partially dividing the ventricle is now going to be complete. So the two ventricles are going to be actually completely separated and have a muscle wall or that septum between the two. What this does is it will completely separate our oxygen poor blood or our blue blood from that oxygen rich blood or our red blood. This makes the oxygen delivery much more efficient because it's going to be 100% of the blood that reaches the muscles will contain some form of oxygen. There's no mixture of the blood. And thus, all of the deoxygenated blood will get pumped to the lungs, become oxygenated, and then return to the heart, and then get pumped to the rest of the body, carrying that oxygen to the muscles. Okay, that's our notes for today. Hopefully, you guys are able to use both the reptile and the bird notes in order to finish up your assignment and get that turned in for week 3. Thanks, guys.